but we are going to start off with chapter 2, page 31, if you are also reading the Penguin's Classic version of this. When I had attained the age of 17, my parents resolved that I should become a student at the University of Ingolstadt. I had hitherto attended schools of Geneva, but my father thought it necessary, for the completion of my education, that I should be made acquainted with other customs than those of my native country. My departure was therefore fixed at an early date, but before the day resolved upon could arrive, the first misfortune of my life occurred, an omen, as it were, of my future misery. Elizabeth had caught the scarlet fever, but her illness was not severe, and she quickly recovered. During her confinement, many arguments had been urged to persuade my mother to refrain from attending upon her. She had, at first, yielded to our entreaties, but when she heard that her favourite was recovering, she could no longer debar herself from society, and entered her chamber long before the danger of infection was past. The consequences of this imprudence were fatal. On the third day, my mother sickened. Her fever was malignant, and the looks from her attendees prognosticated the worst event. On her deathbed, the fortitude and benignity of this admirable woman did not desert her. She joined the hands of Elizabeth and myself. "My children," she said, "my firmest hopes for your future happiness were placed upon the prospect of your union. The expectation will now be the consolation of your father. Elizabeth, my love, you must supply my place to your younger cousins. Alas! I regret that I am taken from you, and happy and beloved as I have been. It is not hard to quit you all, but these are not thoughts befitting me. I will endeavour to resign myself cheerfully to death, and will indulge a hope of meeting you in another world." She died calmly, and her countenance expressed affection even in death. I need not describe the feelings of those whose dearest ties are rent by those most irreparable evil, the void that presents itself to the soul, and the despair that is exhibited on the countenance. It is so long before the mind can persuade itself that she, whom we saw every day, and whose very existence appeared a part of our own, can have departed forever. That the brightness of a beloved eye can have been extinguished, and the sound of a voice so familiar and dear to the ear can be hushed, never more to be heard. These are the reflections of the first days, but when the lapse of time proves the reality of the evil, then the actual bitterness of grief commences. Yet, from whom has not that rude hand rent away some dear connection? And why should I describe a sorrow which all have felt, and must feel? The time at length arrives when grief is rather an indulgence than a necessity, and the smile that plays upon the lips, although it may be deemed a sacrilege, is not banished. My mother was dead, but we still had duties which we ought to perform. We must continue our course with the rest, and learn to think ourselves fortunate, whilst one remains whom the spoiler has not seized. My journey in Ingolstadt, which had been deferred by these events, was now again determined upon. I obtained from my father a respite of some weeks. This period was spent sadly. My mother's death and my speedy departure depressed our spirits. But Elizabeth endeavoured to renew the spirit of cheerfulness in our little society. Since the death of her aunt, her mind had acquired a new firmness and vigour. She was determined to fulfil her duties with the greatest exactness, and she felt that most imperious duty of rendering her uncle and cousins happy had devolved upon her. She consoled me, amused her uncle, instructed my brothers, and I never beheld her so enchanting as this time, when she was so continually endeavouring to contribute to the happiness of others, entirely forgetful of herself. The day of my departure at length arrived. I had taken leave of all my friends, expecting Clerval, who spent the last evening with us. He bitterly lamented that he was unable to accompany me, but his father could not be persuaded to part with him, intending that he should become a partner with him in business, in compliance with his favourite theory that learning was superfluous in the commerce of ordinary life. Henry had a refined mind. He had no desire to be idle and was well pleased to become his father's partner. But he believed that a man might be a very good trader and yet possess a cultivated understanding. We sat late, listening to Hope's complaints and making many little arrangements for the future. The next morning, early, I departed. Tears gushed from the eyes of Elizabeth. They proceeded partly from sorrow at my departure, and partly because she reflected that the same journey was to have taken place 3 months before, when a mother's blessing would have accompanied me. I threw myself into the chaise, and was to convey me away, and I indulged in the most melancholy reflections. I, who had ever been surrounded by amiable companions, continually engaged in endeavouring to bestow mutual pleasure. I was now alone. In the university, whither I was going, I must form my own friends and be my own protector. My life had hitherto been remarkably secluded and domestic, and this had given me invincible repugnance to new countenances. I loved both my brothers, Elizabeth and Clerval. These were old familiar faces, but I believed myself totally unfitted for the company of strangers. Such were my reflections as I commenced my journey. But as I proceeded, my spirits and hopes rose. I ardently desired the acquisition of knowledge. I had often, when at home, thought it hard to remain during my youth cooped up in one place, and had longed to enter the world and take my station among other human beings. Now my desires were complied with, and it would indeed have been folly to repent. I had sufficient leisure for these and many other reflections during my journey to Ingolstadt, which was long and fatiguing. At length the high white steeple of town met my eyes. I alighted and was conducted to my solitary apartment to spend the evening as I pleased. The next morning I delivered letters of introduction and paid a visit to some of the principal professors, among others, to M. Krempe, the professor of natural philosophy. He received me with politeness and asked me several questions concerning my progress in the different branches of science appertaining to natural philosophy. I mentioned, it is true, with fear and trembling, that the only authors I had ever read upon these subjects. The professor stared. "Have you," he said, "really spent your time in studying such nonsense?" I replied in the affirmative. "Every minute," continued M. Krempe with wrath. "Every instant that you have wasted on those books is utterly, entirely lost. You have burdened your memory with exploded systems and useless names. Good God! In what desert land have you lived, where no one was kind enough to inform you of these fantasies, which you have so greedily imbibed, are 1,000 years old, and as musty as they are ancient? I little expected in this enlightened and scientific age to find a disciple of Albertus Magnus and Paracelsus. My dear sir, you must begin your studies entirely new." So, saying, he stepped aside and wrote down a list of several books treating of natural philosophy, which he desired me to procure, and dismissed me, after mentioning that in the beginning of the following week he intended to commence a course of lectures upon natural philosophy and its general relations, and that M. Walden, a fellow professor, would lecture upon chemistry the alternate days that he missed. I returned home, not disappointed, for I had long considered that those authors useless whom the professor had so strongly reprobated, but I did not feel much inclined to study the books which I procured at his recommendation. M. Krempe was a little squat man, with a gruff voice and repulsive countenance. The teacher, therefore, did not prepossess me in favour of his doctrine. Besides, I had a contempt for the uses of modern natural philosophy. It was very different. When the masters of science sought immortality and powers, such views, although futile, were grand. But now the scene was changed. The ambition of the inquirer seemed to limit itself to the annihilation of those visions on which my interest in science was chiefly founded. I was required to exchange chimeras of boundless grandeur for realities of little worth. Such were my reflections during the first 2 All 3 days, spent almost in solitude, but as the ensuring week commenced, I thought of the information which M. Kremp had given me concerning the lectures, and although I could not consent to go and hear that little conceited fellow deliver sentences out of a pulpit, I recollected what he had said of M. Walden, whom I had never seen, and he had hitherto been out of town. Partially from curiosity, and partially from idleness, I went into the lecturing room, which M. Walton entered shortly after. This professor was very unlike his colleague. He appeared about 50 years of age, but with an aspect expressiveness of the greatest benevolence. A few grey hairs covered his temple, but those at the back of his head were nearly black. His person was short, but remarkably erect, and his voice was the sweetest I had ever heard. He began his lecture by a recapitulation of the history of chemistry and the various improvements made by different men of learning, pronouncing with fervour the names of the most distinguished discoverers. He then took a cursory view of the present state of the science and explained many of its elementary terms. After having made a few preparatory experiments, he concluded with a panegyric upon modern chemistry, the terms of which I shall never forget. "The ancient teachers of this science," he said, "promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promised very little. They know that metals can be transmuted and that the elixir of life is a chimera, but these philosophers, whose hands seem only made to dabble in dirt and their eyes pore over microscope of crucible, have indeed performed miracles. They penetrate into the recess of nature and show how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. They've discovered how blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. They've acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They could command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows." I departed, highly pleased with the professor and his lecture, and paid him a visit of the same evening. His manners in private were even more mild and attractive than in public, for in his own house was replaced by the greatest affability and kindness. He heard with attention my little narration concerning my studies, and smiled at the names of Cornelius Agrippa and Paracelsus, but without contempt that M. Kremp had exhibited. He said that these were men who, indefatigable zeal, modern philosophers were indebted for most of the foundations of their knowledge. They had left to us an easier task to give new names and arrange in connected classifications the facts which they, in a great degree, had been the instruments of bringing to light. The labours of men of genius, however erroneously directed, scarcely ever fail in ultimately turning to the solid advantage of mankind. I listened to his statement, which was delivered without any presumption or affection, and then added that his lecture had removed my prejudice against modern chemists, and I, at the same time, requested his advice concerning the books I ought to procure. "I am happy," said M. Walden, "to have gained a disciple, and if your application equals your ability, I have no doubt of your success. Chemistry is that branch of natural philosophy in which the greatest improvements have been and may be made. It is on that account that I have made it my peculiar study, but at the same time I have not neglected the other branches of science. A man would make but a very sorry chemist if he attended to that department of human knowledge alone. If your wish is to become really a man of science, and not merely a petty experimentalist, I should advise you to apply to every branch of natural philosophy, including mathematics." He then took me into the laboratory and explained to me the uses of the various machines, instructing me to what I ought to procure, and promising me the use of his own, when I should have advanced far enough in the science to not derange their mechanism. He also gave me a list of books which I had requested, and I took my leave. Thus ended a memorable day to me. It decided my future destiny. end of chapter 2. Sorry, the vacuum started a little bit towards the end of it, so when I started tripping over my words there, I do apologize. I had a vacuum cleaner in my ear. It's very this whatever like auto sound voice clearer thing this wavelength just offered to me, absolutely incredible. The fact that you could not hear it. I just got blamed for putting a pregnant man on the timeline. That was not me. I was like, why am I getting a bunch of messages? That was not me. I'll respond later. Oh, Canary vacuum. Sorry I have to deal with it though. That's okay. It's probably better that it's more glitch. Oh, Sims 4 glitch strikes again. Yeah. Okay. Give me 1 second. I just need to accept a proposal on VGen really quick, and then we will do a quick chapter discussion because, oh, there's some things we need to talk about with this one. VGen, I think, is broken though because I'm not able to accept it. Wait, here we go. But yeah, as you might be able to tell in this last chapter, I think Victor Frankenstein might be a little bit silly with it. And by silly with it, I mean a raging narcissist. Because, well, you see how he treats the different professors? Give me 1 second to type. I'm gonna let you sit on this. The narcissist thing, if someone can beat me to the punch, I will be not grateful, but impressed. You'll get brownie points if you can tell me what his narcissism and vanity looked like in this chapter. I'll give you a hint. It's to do with the professors. It's gonna be something you can send delivered to me or something. No, it's all good. I don't like asking for money and stuff. Obviously, I do have the ways to send money open. I'll never say no to money, but I won't require it to make. I won't be like, send me money to make me feel better. I'm very sad. You gotta give me $500 to make me feel better. Yeah. I think for delivery, like I used to have like phone stuff, but I never remember to update that. Okay. I've done what I needed to do. Sorry, this is me constantly getting distracted today. But yeah, with Victor Frankenstein, you can tell how he treats the two professors. With M. Kremp, you know how he describes him. He's like, he's a short, ugly man that's got a gruff, low voice. He's kind of looking at him and going, I'm not going to listen to you because in my eyes, you aren't someone that I'm going to respect because you're kind of ugly. Meanwhile, the chemistry professor, he's like, whoa, he's such a gentleman. He's so hot. I really think that Victor Frankenstein is a little bit bisexual with it. When you hear how he's describing these men. And it's like, yeah, this one was ugly. I don't want to listen to him. He obviously doesn't know what he's talking about. This chemistry teacher, though, ooh, I'm glad I went to this class. He's a hottie. He's a hottie. And hello, Riano. I'm just gonna quickly go back in chat. Welcome in, Potskari, if you're still here. I'm just quickly reading. Everyone during this time period carried around a dictionary. Yeah, there are some words in this where I'm like, oh, this is certainly an 1818 This is certainly the 1818 text I'm reading right now. These big old words. These big old words. There are somewhere I'm like, I know what the word is, and I could give you the definition of the word, but when I'm looking at it, I'm like, I don't know. I can't remember how to say this anymore. I haven't had to say this word out loud ever. And sometimes it's like a word will be like cut off and like hyphen between like lines in the page. So I'll be like reading the first half, and because it's like not, I have to like turn my head a little bit to see the next one because it's at the start of the next line. I'm just like, I don't know how this word is ending as I'm reading the first half of it. Oh my goodness me. But yeah, let me take another quick drink and we will go on to chapter 2. Or chapter 3, I mean. We're gonna start getting to the good stuff, I think, because Victor Frankenstein's now at his new school. He's gotten access to his chemistry stuff. As soon as, well, he gets far enough ahead where he's not gonna break all the equipment. So he's got the place and he's got the means. He just needs to complete the idea. And then bam! He's in. Victor followed his yaoi instincts to the darkest end. See, if this was Yuri, it would be a completely... I'm sure someone has done a retelling of Frankenstein, but Yuri instead of yaoi, because this is obviously yaoi. Okay. Taking a little spin of drink. It is now time to start chapter number 3. From this day, natural philosophy, and particularly chemistry, in the most comprehensive sense of the term, became nearly my sole occupation. I read with ardor these works, so full of ingenious and discrimination, which modern inquirers have written on these subjects. I attended lectures and cultivated the acquaintance of the men of science of the university, and I found, even in M. Kremp, a great deal of sound sense and real information, combined, it is true, with a repulsive physiognomy and manners, but not on the account the less valuable. In M. Walton I found a true friend. His gentleness was never tinged by dogmatism, and his instructions were given with an air of frankness and good nature that banished every idea of pedantry. It was, perhaps, an amiable character of this man that inclined me more to the branch of natural philosophy which he professed, than an intrinsic love of the science itself. But this state of mind had place only in the first step towards knowledge. The more fully I entered the science, the more exclusively I pursued it for my own sake. That application, which at first had been a matter of duty and resolution, now became so ardent and eager that the stars often disappeared in the light of morning, whilst I was yet engaged in my laboratory. As I applied so closely, it may be easily conceived that I am improved rapidly. My ardour was indeed the astonishment of the students, and my proficiency that of the masters. Professor Kremp often asked me with a sly smile how Cornelius Agrippa went on, whilst M. Walden expressed the most heartfelt exultation in my progress. 2 years passed in this manner, during which I paid no visit to Geneva, but was engaged heart and soul in the pursuit of some discoveries, which I hoped to make. None of those who experience them can conceive the enticements of science. In other studies, you go as far as others have gone before you, and there is nothing more to know. But in a scientific pursuit, there is continual food for discovery and wonder. A mind of moderate capacity, which closely pursues one's study, must infallibly arrive at great proficiency in that study, and I, who continually sought the attainment of one object of pursuit, was solely wrapped up in this, improved so rapidly that, at the end of 2 years, I made some discoveries in the improvement of some chemical instruments, which procured me great esteem and admiration at the university. When I had arrived at this point, and had become as well acquainted with the theory and practice of natural philosophy as depended on the lessons of any professors at Ingolstadt, my residence there being no longer conductive of my improvements, I thought of returning to my friends in native town, when an incident happened that protracted my stay. One of the phenomena which had peculiarly attracted my attention was the structure of the human frame, and, indeed, any animal imbued with life. Whence, I often asked myself, did the principle of life proceed? It was a bold question, and one which has ever been considered a mystery, yet with how many things we were upon the brink of becoming acquainted, if cowardice or carelessness did not restrain our inquiries. I resolved these circumstances in my mind, and determined thenceforth to apply myself more particularly to those branches of natural philosophy which relate to physiology. Unless I had been animated by an almost supernatural enthusiasm, my application to this study would have been more irksome and almost intolerable. To examine the cause of life, we must first have recourse to death. I became acquainted with the science of anatomy, but this was not sufficient. I must also observe natural decay and corruption of the human body. In my education, my father had taken the greatest precautions that my mind should be impressed with no supernatural horrors. I do not ever remember to have trembled at the tale of superstition, or to have feared the apparition of a spirit. Darkness had no effect on my fancy, and a churchyard to me was merely the receptacle of bodies depraved of life, which, from being the seat of beauty and strength, had become food for the worm. Now I was led to examine the cause and progress of this decay, and forced to spend days and nights in vaults and charnel houses. My attention was fixed upon every object the most insupportable to the delicacy of human feelings. I saw how fine form of man was degraded and wasted. I beheld the corruption of death succeeded to the blooming cheek of life. I saw how the worm inherited the wonders of the eye and brain. I paused, examining and analyzing all the minute of causation, as exemplified in the charge from life to death, and death to life, until from the midst of this darkness a sudden light broke upon me. A light so brilliant and wondrous, yet so simple, that while I became dizzy with immensity of the prospect which it is illustrated, I was surprised that among so many men of genius who had directed their inquiries towards the same science, that I alone should be reserved to discover so astonishing a secret. Remember, I am not recording the vision of a madman. The sun does not more certainly shine in heavens than to which I now affirm is true. Some miracle might have produced it, yet the stages of the discovery were distinct and probable. After days and nights of incredible labor and fatigue, I succeeded in discovering the cause of generation in life, nay, more. I became myself capable of bestowing animation upon lifeless matter. The astonishment which I had first experienced on this discovery soon gave place to delight and rapture. After so much time spent in painful labor, to arrive at once at the summit of my desires was the most gratifying consummation of my toils. But this discovery was so great and overwhelming that all the steps by which I had been progressively led to it were obliterated, and I beheld the only result. What had been the study and desire of the wisest men since the creation of the world was now within my grasp. Not that, like a magic scene, it all opened upon me at once. The information I had obtained was of a nature rather to direct my endeavors, so soon as I should point them towards the object of my search, than to exhibit that object already accomplished. I was like the Arabian, who had been buried with the dead, and found a passage to life aided only by one glimmering, and seemingly ineffectual, light. I see by your eagerness and wonder and hope which your eyes express, my friend, that you expect to be informed of the secret with which I am acquainted. That cannot be. Listen patiently until the end of my story, and you will easily perceive why I am reserved upon that subject. I will not lead you on, unguarded and ardent as I then was, to your destruction and infallible misery. Learn from me, not by my precepts, at least by my example, how dangerous is the acquirement of knowledge, and how much happier the man who believes his native town to be the world than he who aspires to become greater than his nature will allow. What I When I found so astonishing a power placed in my hands, I hesitated for a long time concerning the manner in which I should employ it. Although I possessed the capacity of bestowing animation, yet to prepare a frame for the reception of it, with all its intricacies of fibers, muscles, and veins, still remained a work of inconceivable difficulty and labor. I doubted at first whether I should attempt the creation of a being like myself, or one of simpler organization, but my imagination was too much exalted by my first success to permit me any doubt of my ability to give life to an animal as complex and wonderful as man. The materials at present within my command hardly appeared adequate to so arduous an undertaking, but I doubted not that I should ultimately succeed. Prepared myself for a multitude of reverses, my operations might be incessantly baffled, and at last my work may be imperfect. Yet, when I considered the improvement which every day takes place in science and mathematics, I was encouraged to hope my present attempts would at least lay the foundations for future successes. Nor could I consider the magnitude and complexity of my plan as any argument of its impracticality. It was with these feelings that I began the creation of a human being. As the minuteness of the parts formed a great hindrance to my speed, I resolved, contrary to my first intention, to make the being of a gigantic stature. That is to say, about 8 feet in height and proportionally large. After having formed this determination, and having spent some months in successfully collecting and arranging my materials, I began. No one can conceive the variety of feelings which bore me onwards like a hurricane in the first enthusiasm of success. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. A new species would bless me as its creator and source. Many happy and excellent natures would owe their being to me. No father could claim the gratitude of his child so completely as I should deserve theirs. Pursuing these reflections, I thought that if I could bestow animation upon lifeless matter, I might in process of time, although I found it impossible, to renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. I'm going to take a quick mid-chapter break to take a drink. Painful labor, you say? This isn't... I took a perfectly timed break. The vacuum's back. Does the reanimated monster become a VTuber in that version? I'm kind of reading this, and do you know what I'm thinking earnestly and honestly? If Victor Frankenstein had just gone back home, married Elizabeth, and become a father sooner, I think he could have just avoided all of this. Because it really sounds, especially in that last paragraph, that he kind of just wants like the clout of being a dad. He just wants someone to respect him as like a father. And instead of going, I'm gonna go to my cousin wife and bear a nice little incest child, it's still really weird to me that Elizabeth is his cousin, but I'm not going to go into that can of worms. Instead of just being a father the normal way, he's like, no, I'm going to make a human being. And they're going to owe their life to me. I don't think he would have been a good dad. Well, we know he wouldn't be a good dad. Well, we will know. Spoilers, we will know he wouldn't have been a good dad. I think just having a child and messing up that child on his own would have like solved a lot of things. Tisha, if you're still here, I don't like that character that you saw pregnant. That wasn't me. That wasn't me. I didn't like that. I haven't even seen Granblue stuff on my timeline. That wasn't me. I'll respond to the message properly after stream to defend myself in case you're not here. Okay. We're gonna continue on. We are on page, well, 42 for me on the 2018 Penguins Classic version of the book. If you're reading along, I'm not sure where that is for you. But we are mid-chapter 3 and about to continue. And hello, Ellen. Welcome in. Right. The whole point is that Victor Frankenstein can't accept his loss. He can't think of anything else, certainly not the future, starting a family. He's too held up in the past. That is true. I think part of, especially when we look at the last lines, I might in process of time renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption. I think part of it is he might be wanting to bring back his mother. He didn't really seem like he cared all that much when she died, but it might have like struck something in him where it's like, I might be able to bring back the people I love in my life. Which I can understand. Considering how my D&D character Dawn is, I completely understand that thought process. I respect him for that alone. I don't respect Victor Frankenstein for a lot of things, though. Oh, wait, that was a raid. I'm so sorry. Welcome in, raiders. I completely missed that. Sorry, my setup is all different. I had to completely reset my PC, so my activity feed is in a slightly different place. But thank you so much, raiders. Let me do a shout out. Sorry, I was so in the sauce. I was so in the sauce of it. Welcome in. Hello, Chester. Hello, Squatch. Let me get the shout out going. I'm so sorry about that. Oh, you're playing Date Everything. I hope you had fun. Aw. I wish I could date Frankenstein's monster, but that's not in the cards for me personally. I want to play Date Everything at some time. It looks really fun. They've got a lot of different character designs. All I know about Date Everything is that Brendan Lee Mulligan's in it. Love that dude. And there's a toxic relationship between dirty clothes and a laundry hamper, and I always see them yelling at each other, mostly the hamper yelling on TikTok. Like, there's so many voice actors in that game. I can only like remember Brendan Lee Mulligan because that's the one I got most excited for. But like, I was at like a local convention and one of the vendors there had like a little sign that was like, "I'm a voice actor in this game," and I was like, "What the heck?" It got everyone on this game. Ellie met the laundry today. Oh, Matt Merce is also in it. Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, welcome in. Thank you. We're just gonna continue reading chapter 3. If you're scrambling to find your page, the last sentence we read was, "I might, in the process of time, renew life where death had apparently devoted the body to corruption." That was the last line we read. I'm gonna take another sip and a drink and then continue reading from there. These thoughts supported my spirits, while I pushed my undertaking with unremitting ardor. My cheek had grown pale with study, and my person had become emancipated with confinement. Sometimes, on the very brink of certainty, I failed, yet I still clung to the hope which the next day or the next hour might realize. One secret which I alone possessed was the hope to which I had dedicated myself. To the moon gazed on my midnight labors, while with unrelaxed and breathless eagerness I pursued nature to her hiding places. Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil, as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave, tortured the living animal to animate this lifeless clay? My limbs now tremble, and my eyes swim with remembrance. But then, a resistless and almost frantic impulse urged me forward. I seemed to have lost all soul of sensation, but for this one pursuit. It was indeed a passing trance that only made me feel renewed with acuteness so soon as, the unnatural stimulus ceasing to operate, I had returned to my old habits. I collected bones from charnel houses and distributed with profane fingers the tremendous secrets of the human frame. In a solitary chamber, or rather cell, at the top of the house, and separated from all other apartments by a gallery and a staircase, I kept my workshop a filthy creation. My eyeballs were starting from their sockets and attending to details of my employment. The dissecting room and the slaughterhouse furnished many of my materials, and often did my human nature turn with loathing from my occupation, whilst, still urged on by an eagerness which perpetually increased, I brought my work to near conclusion. The summer months passed while I was thus engaged, heart and soul in one pursuit. It was a most beautiful season. Never did the fields bestow a more plentiful harvest, or the vines yield a more luxuriant vintage, but my eyes were insensible to the charms of nature, and the same feelings which made me neglect the scenes around me caused me also to forget those friends who were so many miles absent, and whom I had not seen for so long a time. I knew my science disquieted them, and I well remembered the words of my father. "I know that while you are pleased with yourself, you will think of us with affection, and we shall hear regularly from you. You must pardon me if I regard any interruption to your correspondence as proof that your other duties are equally neglected." I knew well, therefore, that would be my father's feelings. But I could not tear my thoughts from my employment, loathsome in itself, but which had taken an irresistible hold of my imagination. I wished, as it were, to procrastinate all that related to my feelings of affection until the greater object, which swallowed up every habit of my nature, should be completed. I then thought that my father would be unjust if he ascribed my neglect to vice or faultiness on my part, but I am now convinced that he was justified in conceiving that I should not be altogether free from blame. A human being in perfection ought to always preserve a calm and peaceful mind, and never to allow passion or a transitory desire to disturb his tranquillity. I do not think that this pursuit of knowledge is an exception to this rule. If the study to which you apply yourself has a tendency to weaken your affections, and to destroy your taste for those simple pleasures in which no ally can possibly mix, then the study is certainly unlawful, that is to say, not benefiting the human mind. If this rule was always observed, if no man allowed any pursuit whatsoever to interfere with the tranquillity of his domestic affections, Greece had not been enslaved, Caesar would have spared his country, America would have been discovered more gradually, and the empires of Mexico and Peru would not have been destroyed. But I forget that I am moralizing in the most interesting part of my tale, and your looks remind me to proceed. My father made no reproach in his letter, and only took notice of my silence by inquiring to my occupations more particularly than before. Winter, spring, and summer passed away during my labours, but I did not watch the blossom or expanding leaves, sights which before always yielded me supreme delight, so deeply was I engrossed in my occupation. The leaves of that year had withered before my work drew to a close, and now every day showed me more plainly how well I had succeeded. But my enthusiasm was checked by my anxiety, and I appeared rather like one doomed by slavery to toil in the mines, or any other unwholesome trade, than an artist occupied by his favourite employment. Every night I was oppressed by a slow fever, and I became nervous to a most painful degree, a disease that I regretted the more because I had hitherto enjoyed most excellent health, and had always boasted of the firmness of my nerves. But I believed that exercise and amusement would soon drive away such symptoms, and I promised myself both of these when my creation should be complete. That was the end of chapter 4. You go sleep now. Good night, Squatch. Oh, thank you for the stretch. That was the end of chapter 3. I don't think Mr. Victor Frankenstein ever got that relaxing time to exercise and fix his health back up. I'll be honest. From what I know of the story, it's a lot downhill from him once he completes. I think he's kind of real for it, though. Not for, like, anything he actually did, but for, like, having a desire and just only focusing on that. Like, his tunnel vision, I understand that. Where it's like, you get so tunnel vision on something, it's like, yeah, I should talk to my family and my friends, but, like, I really want to work on this right now. I get it. I so totally get it with him. don't get anything else he's doing, but I do get that. Determinant. If you remember correct, Shelley wrote this after an awful vacation at Lord Byron House, which kind of explains Victor's wretched bisexuality, boy failure inclinations. I'm gonna have to look up Lord Byron House. What happened on her vacation to spark this mess of a man? God. I'd say I wish I could get into Victor's mind and dissect it, but I'm unfortunately in his mind, and I don't like it here. Okay. Let me see how long chapter 4 is, because we can definitely... Oh yeah, chapter 4 is not too long. We can definitely get to... We can definitely finish this chapter, and then I'll see how I feel at the end of it, if we're gonna do... Let me see how long chapter 5 is as well. Ooh. We might be able to get through chapter 4 and 5. We'll definitely be able to get through chapter 4. But I'll see how I am with stumbling on words. Hello, Nexus. Welcome in. You're just in time for chapter 4. I'm gonna take another drink because my mouth is very dry. I'm gonna also cough, so I'm gonna mute for a second. Okay. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the most accomplishment of my toils. Of an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. It was already 1 in the morning. The rain pattered dismally against the panes, and my candle was nearly burnt out, when, by the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. Its breathed hard, and convulsive motion agitated its limbs. How can I describe my emotions at this catastrophe, or how delineate the wretch whom of which such infinite pains and care I endeavoured form? His limbs were in proportion, and I had selected his features as beautiful. Beautiful, great God! His yellow skin scarcely covered the works of muscle and arteries beneath. His hair was of a lustrous black and flowing, his white teeth of a pearly whiteness, but these luxuriances only formed a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes, which seemed almost the same colour as the dun white sockets in which they were set, his shriveled complexion, and straight black lips. The different accidents of life are not so changeable as feelings of human nature. I had worked hard for nearly 2 years for the sole purpose of infusing life into an inanimate body. For this I had deprived myself of rest and health. I desired it with an ardour that far exceeded moderation. But now that I had finished, the beauty of that dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart. Unable to endure the aspect of being I created, I rushed out of the room and continued a long time traversing to my bedchamber, unable to compose my mind to sleep. At length lassitude succeeded the tumult I had before endured, and threw myself on the bed in my clothes, endeavouring to seek a few moments of forgetfulness. But it was in vain. I slept indeed, but I was disturbed by the wildest dreams. I thought I saw Elizabeth, in the bloom of health, walking in the streets of Ingolstadt. Delighted and surprised, I embraced her, but as I imprinted the first kiss on her lips, they became livid with the hue of death. Her features appeared to change, and I thought I held the corpse of my dead mother in my arms. A shroud enveloped her form, and I saw the grave worms crawling in the folds of the flannel. I started from my sleep with horror. A cold dew covered my forehead, my teeth chattered, and every limb became convulsed, when, by the dim and yellow light of the moon, as it forced its way through the window shutters, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster who I had created. He held up the curtain of the bed, and his eyes, if eyes they may be called, were fixed on me. His jaw opened, and he muttered some inarticulate sounds, while a grin wrinkled on his cheeks. He might have spoken, but I did not hear. One hand stretched out, seemingly to detain me, but I escaped. I rushed down the stairs. I took refuge in the courtyard belonging to the house which I inhabited, where I remained during the rest of the night, walking up and down in the greatest agitation, listening attentively, catching and fearing every sound, as if it were to announce the approach of the demoniacal corpse to which I had so miserably given life. Oh, no mortal could support the horror of that countenance. A mummy again, endued with animation, could not be so hideous as that wretch. I had gazed on him while unfinished. He was ugly then, but when those muscles and joints were rendered capable of motion, it became a thing such as even Dante could have not conceived. I passed the night wretchedly. Sometimes my pulse beat so quickly and hardly that I felt the palpitation of each artery, and others I nearly sank to the ground through languor and extreme weakness. Mingled with this horror, I felt the bitterness of disappointment. Dreams that had been my food and pleasant rest so long for a space would now become a hell to me, and the change was so rapid, the overthrow so complete. Morning, dismal and wet, at length dawned and discovered to my sleepless and aching eyes the church of Lugolstad. Its white steeple and clock, which indicated the 6th hour. The porter opened the gates to the court, which that night had been my asylum, and I issued onto the streets, pacing them with quick steps, as I sought to avoid the wretch whom I feared every turning of the street would present to my view. I did not dare return to the apartment which I inhabited, but felt so impelled to hurry on, although wetted by rain, which had poured on from a black and comfortless sky. I continued walking in this manner for some time, and devouring by bodily exercise, to ease the load that weighed upon my mind. I traversed the streets without any clear conception of where I was, or what I was doing. My heart palpitated in the sickness of fear. I hurried on with irregular steps, not daring to look about me. Like one who, on a lonely road, doth walk in fear and dread, and having once turned around walks on, and turns no more in his lead, because he knows a frightful fiend doth close behind him tread. Continuing thus, I came at length opposite to the inn, of which the various diligences and carriages usually stopped. Here I paused. I knew not why, but I remained some minutes with my eyes fixed on a coach that was coming towards me from the other end of the street. As it drew nearer, I observed that it was the Swiss diligence. It stopped just where I was standing, and on the door being opened, I perceived Henry Clerval, who, on seeing me, instantly sprung out. "My dear Frankenstein," exclaimed he, "how glad I am to see you! How fortunate that you should be here at the very moment of my alighting!" Nothing could equal my delight on seeing Clerval. His presence brought back my thoughts of my father, Elizabeth, and all those scenes of home so dear to my recollection. I grasped his hand, and in a moment forgot my horror and misfortune. I felt suddenly, and for the first time during many months, calm and serene joy. I welcomed my friend, therefore, in the most cordial manner, and we walked towards my college. Clerval continued talking for some time about our mutual friends, and his own good fortune in being permitted to come to Ingolstadt. "You may easily believe," he said, "how great was the difficulty to persuade my father that it was not absolutely necessary a merchant not to understand anything except bookkeeping, and indeed I believe I left him incredulous to last, for his constant answer to my unwearied entreaties was the same as that of the Dutch schoolmaster of Vicar of Wakefield. I have 10,000 florins a year without Greek, and I heartily eat without Greek. But his affection for me at length overcame his dislike for learning, and he permitted me to undertake a voyage of discovery to the land of knowledge." "It gives me the greatest delight to see you, but tell me how you left my father, brothers, and Elizabeth." "Very well and happy, only a little uneasy that they hear from you so seldom. By the by, I mean to lecture you a little upon their arrival myself. But my dear Frankenstein, continued he, stopping short and gazing full in my face, I did not remark how ill you appear. So thin and pale, you look as though you'd been watching for several nights. You have guessed right. I have lately been so deeply engaged in one occupation that I have not allowed myself sufficient rest, as you see, but I sincerely hope, that all these employments are now at an end, and I am at length free. I trembled excessively. I could not endure to think of, and far less allude to the occurrence of the preceding night. I walked with a quick pace, and we soon arrived at my college. I then reflected, and the thought made me shiver, that the creature whom I had left in my apartment might still be there, alive and walking about. I dreaded to behold this monster, but I feared still more that Henry should see him. Entreating him, therefore, to remain a few minutes at the bottom of the stairs, I darted up towards my room. My hand was already on the lock of the door before I recollected myself. I then paused, and a cold shivering came over me. I threw the door open forcibly, as children are accustomed to do when they expect a spectre to stand in waiting for them on the other side. But nothing appeared. I stepped in fearfully. The apartment was empty. My bedroom was also freed from its hideous geist. I could hardly believe that so great a good fortune could have befallen me. But when I became assured that my enemy had indeed fled, I clapped my hands for joy and ran down to Clerval. We ascended into my room, and the servant presently brought breakfast, but I was unable to contain myself. It was not joy only that possessed me. I felt my flesh tingle with the excessive sensitiveness, and my pulse beat rapidly. I was unable to remain for a single instant in the same place. I jumped over chairs, clapped my hands, and laughed aloud. Clerval, at first, attributed my unusual spirits to joy of his arrival, but when he observed me more attentively, he saw a wildness in my eye for which he could not account, and my loud, unrestrained, heartless laughter frightened and astonished him. "My dear Victor," cried he, "what for God's sake is the matter? Do not laugh in that manner. How ill you are! What is the cause of all this?" "Do not ask me," cried I, putting hands before my eyes, for I thought I saw the dreaded spectre glide into the room. "He can tell. Oh, save me, save me!" I imagined that the monster seized me. I struggled furiously and fell down in a fit. Poor Clerval. What must be his feelings? A meeting which he had anticipated with such joy, so strangely turned to bitterness. But I was not the witness to his grief, for I was lifeless, and did not recover my senses for a long, long time. This was the commencement of a nervous fever, which confined me for several months. During all that time, Henry was my only nurse. I afterwards learned that, knowing my father's advanced age and unfitness for so long a journey, and how wretched my sickness would make Elizabeth, he spared them this grief by concealing the extent of my disorder. He knew that I could not have a more kind and attentive nurse than himself, and, firm in the hope he felt of my recovery, he did not doubt that, instead of doing harm, he performed the kindest action that he could towards them. But I was in reality very ill, and surely nothing but the unbounded and unremitting attentiveness of my friend could have restored me to life. The form of the monster on whom I had bestowed existence was forever before my eyes, and I raved incessantly concerning him. Doubtless my words surprised Henry. He at first believed them to be wanderings of my disturbed imagination, but the pertinacity to which I continually recurred the same subject persuaded him that my disorder indeed owed its origins to some uncommon and terrible event. By slow degrees and frequent relapses that alarmed and graved my friend, I recovered. I remember the first time I became capable of observing outward objects with any kind of pleasure. I perceived that the fallen leaves had disappeared, and that the young buds were shooting forth from the trees that shaded my window. It was a divine spring, and the season contributed greatly to my convalescence. I also felt sentiments of joy and affection revive in my bosom. My gloom disappeared, and in a short time I became as cheerful as before I was attacked by that fateful passion. Dearest Clerval, exclaimed I, how kind, how very good you are to me. This whole winter, instead of being spent in study, as you promised yourself, has been consumed in my sick room. How shall I ever repay you? My greatest remorse for the disappointment of which I have been the occasion. But will you forgive me? But you will forgive me. You will repay me entirely if you do not discompose yourself. But get well as fast as you can, and since you appear in such good spirits, I may speak to you on one subject, may I not? I trembled. One subject? What could it be? Could he allude to an object on whom I dared not even think? Compose yourself, said Clerval, who observed my change of colour. I will not mention it if it agitates you, but your father and cousin would be happy if they received a letter from you in your own handwriting. They hardly know how ill you've been, and are uneasy in your long silence. Is that all? My dear Henry, how could you suppose that my first thought would not fly towards my dear, dear friends? Oh, my love, and are deserving of my love. If this is your present temper, my friend, you'll perhaps be glad to see a letter that's been lying here some days for you. It's from your cousin, I believe. And that is the end of chapter 4. No, Igor's not in this book. I think Igor is a movie made creation. You got a slaps featuring Dante from Devil May Cry series. Stick around this one. I know. I read the word Dante and I was thinking, whoa, this is just like Devil May Cry. This is Devil May Cry. Oh my god, in the YouTube chat, someone also brought up Dante. Oh. Man. But yeah, we got to, in that last chapter, that was a busy chapter. We got to meet our boy Frankenstein's monster. At first he was described as being a hottie, but then he was quickly described as being a naughty. Me personally, I wouldn't have run out of the room immediately. It does make me wonder, how did Frankenstein's monster find Victor Frankenstein's apartment? Unless you guys think that was also an apparition, and that because you'd think people would be like, yeah, I just saw this like really ugly huge man walking around. What was up with that? Like, no rumors happened, and Frankenstein's monster somehow broke through his window. How do you know where he lives? Where did he go after that? It's a lot of mysteries, but I think the mysteries might have to wait until next week. So I'm starting to slip over some words. I'm debating it, but I think chapter 5 is a little bit longer. So I think I'm not gonna push it. What if the monster actually looks normal and Vic's just being shitty like with his professor? That's always possible. I like the reading where Frankenstein is just really beautiful. It doesn't help that my copy of the book has a really ugly Frankenstein on the cover. He's actually not that ugly. It might just be the art style. He's got a lot of cuts on his head though, but I mean, he is a corpse stitched together. Maybe because he's naked. Maybe that's why Victor Frankenstein was like, ah, he's ugly, I'm scared. How am I feeling? Feeling better. Thank you for asking, Ray. I'm gonna have to put a timestamp at the beginning of the... I don't know if I'll just cut out the beginning of the YouTube VOD. That might be confusing for people though, because then they'll hear me talking about a vacuum. I'll think on it. Because I think you can trim YouTube VODs. I actually don't know. You can trim YouTube videos. I don't know about VODs though. I'll look into it. But I think it's been, because I spent 20 minutes yapping and waiting to see if the vacuum would turn off. So I've been reading for about an hour. I really, you see, it's me wanting to keep going, but the next chapter is the next chapter is kind of long. It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. About 7 to 8 pages. Yeah, it's probably gonna be best so I'm not super slipping over. We leave that here. It's been a good hour. I'm hoping next week I won't have a vacuum going on in the background, so my mood won't be fluctuating, and we can get through a little bit more of this. But we got through 2 chapters. That's pretty good. Also, reminder to self: put what chapter we're on in the YouTube VODs. Put it in the description, because I meant to do that and I completely forgot. So when people are, if they ever go back through it, they can easily find which one they're supposed to be at. I never fixed the bitrate. That's what I was gonna do, and then I got distracted by the vacuum. I think my stream settings are really off, because it's saying the stream's current bitrate is lower than the recommended bitrate by a considerable amount. And I don't know what to do about that. I'll figure that out after. It's a bit too late for me to be doing bitrate still, I think. Oh right, didn't Dr. Frankenstein hallucinate in this chapter? Oh, he hallucinated a lot. He had a dream that he kissed Elizabeth, and then Elizabeth turned into his mother, who was dead, and maggots started crawling out of her. And then when he awoke, he saw the monster he created in his room. So that's why I'm like, it is possible that he did hallucinate it, because later when he was with Henry Clerval, he hallucinated a lot more. He hallucinated for like months and was sick in bed from it. So it's hard to tell if Frankenstein, the monster, was in his room. But I'm like, it's entirely possible that he could be, because I don't know where else he would have gone. And just the fact that no one's seen this guy, this like 8-foot tall monster, no one's thought to mention it. I don't know. But yeah, I'm gonna go find someone to raid on Twitch. I do hope next week we can get through more. We should be good for Wednesday. I need to double check. It's probably too late. It's probably the week after where we continue Resident Evil Outbreak. So I should be okay for Wednesday next week. Or more Frankenstein. We had to push it to Friday, but I want to get back to Frankenstein Wednesdays. Wednesdays is a good day for Frankenstein, I think. It just makes sense in my head that I'm like, yeah, Wednesday, that's when Frankenstein does his stuff. But yeah, with that, we're gonna go right into Aqua, who's playing some Final Fantasy VII. Ooh la la, Sephiroth's on screen. But I hope everyone has a good— the vacuum is back. I hope you all have a great night. Between this and Crime and Punishment, the 1800s had a lot of angst intellectuals being sick in their apartments. I should read Crime and Punishment at some point. I've seen it referenced in other stuff, like Yaoi. There's a Yaoi that I think has like a play on Crime and Punishment in the title. I haven't read it because it seems it's not up my alley. If it is, it's from the 1800s. It's probably isn't public domain. If it's in the public domain, we can put it on our to read list after. We can read anything as long as it's public domain. I think the Sherlock Holmes stuff aren't in public domain yet, but I'm not above reading Sherlock Holmes. I'll read that one. Even though it's not in public domain yet. But everything else that's public domain, that's free to us. But this is going to take us probably a month or two for Frankenstein. Probably 3 months. Probably about 3 months. It's going to take 10 streams, give or take, depending on how fast we read it. If we can get through a little bit more next time and keep up that pace with like 3 chapters a stream, I think we got this, because there's 300 pages. So I estimated if I can get through about 30 pages in a stream, then it's going to take us about 10, 11 streams. But yeah, it's going to kick me out for Twitch with rating. Have a good night. Get out of my house. Pew, 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 pew. I don't know why I did that. Bye.